The question is, how do you measure entrepreneurial ecosystem performance? There are different ways of doing that. There are different tools out there. And we're going to present to you some of the tools that we've been involved in. We don't think that we've got it fixed. We think that we're making a start. And you might have ideas on how you can measure entrepreneurial ecosystems better. But as I say, we haven't officially started the thing. We're still waiting for people to come in. But why don't we just introduce ourselves, though, on the stage?
Thank you, John. So my name is Chris Haley. I am head of research at an organization called Startup Genome. Startup Genome is a research-led policy advisory and consultancy firm. We are quite international, teams in the US, UK, Germany, and India.
And I'm John Potter. I'm at the OECD. I'm head of the entrepreneurship policy unit in the OECD Center for Entrepreneurship.
Hi everyone, my name is Adenike Adeyemi. I am the head of Faith Foundation in Nigeria. We're a 25-year-old nonprofit. We have two divisions. One focuses on direct financial and non-financial services for small and growing businesses. And then our second division, the Faith Institute, works a lot around research and public policy advocacy for the small and growing business entrepreneurship ecosystem.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Erik Stalma, I'm professor at Utrecht University and Stellenbosch University, where I've joined Pumlani Nkondwana at the Ellen Grace Center for Africa Entrepreneurship.
Pumlani from South Africa. I'm very happy to be here. So I'm a director for Allen Gray Center for African Entrepreneurship and head of research for Allen and Jill Gray Philanthropies.
So I think we're starting. I shall stand up to announce that. And as you know, the topic is entrepreneurial ecosystem measurement. We're pleased that the entrepreneurial ecosystem concept has taken off and it's being used by policymakers. But, you know, how do you know what parts of the ecosystem you need to strengthen? And data would help. We've been trying to put it together. Let's put up the slide. The big piece of news is that we've launched a new report, a new OECD report. It's actually up on the OECD website. So you can go to the OECD publications and you can look up Entrepreneurial Ecosystem Diagnostics. And that's the new report that we've launched, you know. The OECD working with Eric here, Eric Stam from Utrecht University. And there's also a working paper up there for those who are more technically minded. And the working paper's on the data and on the methods. So there's a little bit more about how we did it in the working paper. So what we want to do here is to get some comments and feedback, to present it, to make you aware of it, to get it disseminated, that report, and to get some feedback on where to go next, because we've also got these other people who are developing their own tools, and there are some other ones out there, but where does the whole field go next? Very pleased that the OECD's put a marker in the ground and with some first data, but in 2 years' time we want to come back with a new edition that'll be better. The clicker. So hopefully you're with me. And if we can share the slides with you afterwards, you'll actually be able to get to it with that link. And what it is, it's a diagnostic tool to help governments and other stakeholders to identify the bottlenecks in their entrepreneurial ecosystems. And that way to prioritize the policy reforms that they need to make. And also to track progress over time as you come back and do this every couple of years. So we've got a novel framework, we've got a new data set, and it's for all of the OECD countries. That's 38 countries. We haven't ventured to try and globalize that. And one of the key things is we decided that we did not want a single composite indicator that told you which country has got the best national entrepreneurial ecosystem in the OECD area. We didn't want to go the way of World Bank doing business. We want the tool to be used for people to diagnose the relative strengths and weaknesses in their own ecosystem so they can target the policy in there. We got three components to the tool. We got inputs, we've got outputs, and we got variation. We'll explain that. The inputs are the essential elements that drive the entrepreneurial performance. So networks, infrastructure, markets, finance, those we're classing as inputs, and we've got data on them. And we've got about 40 indicators. We pull them together in composites for each element. The outputs are the entrepreneurial performance, so we've got a sort of bank of output data with startup rates, survival rates, high growth firm rates. And the variation is measuring the extent to which the performance in the entrepreneurial ecosystem is homogeneous or different by social group and by region. And we track that at 3 points in time. You'll see it. So the rationale to have a unified source of entrepreneurship data at national level for all the OECD countries. We found this quite popular in the past. The Entrepreneurship at a Glance publication was very popular, an OECD publication that stopped in 2017. People were using it to get the entrepreneurship rates for their country compared to the others. Well, that stopped. So we've reintegrated that into this thing, but now we've got the determinants organized by the 10 pillars of the entrepreneurial ecosystem framework. The rationale is to enable diagnosis of strengths and weaknesses. The focus is on productive entrepreneurship. We've had a lot of question about that, what that means, but it's employment generating. Not necessarily the biggest stars, the Silicon Valley stars, going down a little bit to employer enterprises. Fills a gap in the existing metrics, we feel, because there's other tools out there, but they've all got a different geography, or they've got a different target, a slightly different focus. The report, when you get it, it's got a chapter on the conceptual framework, the measurements of the 10 inputs, the measurements of the outputs, the measurements of the variation, and then we've got a profile for each country and some inspiring policy practices. So if you wanted to do something about this performance, maybe have a look at these policies. This is the framework. This framework is adapted from certain Eric Stam, so luckily he's in the room. If you've got questions, we've got two types of entrepreneurial input, ecosystem element. You've got the institutions. So those are formal regulations on number one there, and informal regulations. Number two is culture. Number three is networks. And then the next ones we're calling resource endowments, and we've got infrastructure, markets, finance, knowledge, talent, leadership, and intermediate services like business advice, in consultancy. And all of that is feeding up into productive entrepreneurship as per the Baumol definition. And the level of productive entrepreneurship, of course, is in turn feeding back into those elements. So better entrepreneurship performance reinforces the culture, reinforces the finance. So we recognize that. We try and keep inputs and outputs separate. So for the inputs, we've explained there are the 10 elements. So we selected them based on the research that there's evidence that those elements have an impact on entrepreneurship performance. That's why we've selected them. And we've got a single element score, which is a composite for each country based on 4 or 5 other sub-indicators. We've only got the inputs in the element scores, and we've chosen indicators using the OECD statistical quality framework. And we've also looked at the literature in terms of what indicators would be good explanators of entrepreneurship. We've done correlation analyses and principal component analyses to see which ones have got the most explanatory power. And we've had various expert workshops and talks, and we've invited many key people to comment. So this is the results. This is one of the figures in the book, and it's showing you the composite scores on the 10 ecosystem elements for each country. I don't know if am I standing in the way for you? So the colors there, the darker the color is, the stronger the performance. And you can read this by going down. If you were to go vertically, you took an element like institutions, then you could see that the darkest ones on institutions would be Ireland, Finland, Estonia, Denmark. There's a block there. So those are the strongest of that batch of OECD countries, and the weakest, Colombia, Costa Rica. Weak institutions, this is to do with the regulations for starting up a business. The doing business type of thing, how many days it takes to start a business, the cost of registering, this sort of thing. Openness to trade might be in there. And you could read it along as well. So you could go inside of a country, you could pick a country, and you could take Denmark, for example, and you could see that the strongest in Denmark would be the talent, the knowledge, the infrastructure, and the institutions. But there are some weak areas in Denmark, which would be, things like the networks, the markets, and the leadership and the intermediate services. So that's the idea of it. It's supposed to point you as a government to where you may have the weaknesses. That's the second batch of OECD countries. There's stuff here that shows the sub-indicators included in the composite scores. So under institutions, you have 4 indicators. You have the rule of law, coming from the Economist Intelligence Unit. I won't go through everything, just some examples. You have the effective tax rate, which comes from the OECD. You have the product market regulation indicator coming from the OECD. And you have the control of corruption index coming from the Varieties of Democracy project. You see, we needed to find sources that were available across all the OECD countries, 38. So we're not completely free to take. We have to find indicators that are measuring institutions, but they're available internationally. And then we aggregate them using the geometric mean. And we do impute for missing values. All of that's in the data and methods report. So these slides will be shared with you later. And this is what we can show with it. You see, we've got here, what this is enabling us to see is the change over time in each element in each country with data pooled for certain sets of years. So we're just covering 2 elements in this slide, although we have all of the elements in the report. And we've put them onto a normalized scale, 0 to 100, with 100 being the best performance. And the blue bars are the most recent, 20 to 23. And then you have the diamonds and the spots that are for the previous years. So, for example, you can see that there's been an improvement in talent in Portugal there. So that's a nice, message for Portugal. You can see that there's been an improvement in institutions in France. That's to do with new corporate tax legislation. So that was the element, so that's what we're showing the governments. And then we've got the outputs. That's a complete list of the outputs. And below it, we've got the variation. Now, you can look at this later. So this is about the outputs. This is a selection of the information on the outputs. So we got two measures there, equity-based young firms, and we've got the birth rate of employer enterprises. We can, you can get the raw data in the report as well. That's at the back of the report. This is the normalized scores. You can see that the highest rate of equity-backed new firms is in Estonia, Netherlands, Switzerland, UK, you know, and there are other countries that are weaker on that. On the other hand, the strongest performers on just standard birth rate of employer enterprises, Colombia, Korea, Turkey, and Estonia gets in twice because they're in the top on both sides. And we've got other ones like survival rate and high growth rate. Now, the point of this final component of it, this is variations, is really to sort of start to touch on this question that an entrepreneurial ecosystem is not the same according to whether you're male or female, according to whether you are in one region or another, if you're in the periphery compared to the capital. So all we're doing is showing the extent of dispersion. If there's a high dispersion in the country, then you're going to need to look more detailed at the regional conditions and at the social conditions. If there's low dispersion, then you've got a better measure with the national. So here on the left, you've got the regional dispersion. So in fact, because it's 100 is the best score and 0 is the worst score, what you essentially have is that the US, strangely, Netherlands, Belgium, are countries with relatively even entrepreneurship rates across regions. And countries like Chile and Slovenia are countries where there's much more regional variation. And then lastly, the missing entrepreneurs rate. The OECD has a report called The Missing Entrepreneurs, latest edition 2023. That gives estimates of the numbers of people in different social groups who would be entrepreneurs if that social group created at the same rate as the male middle-aged population. And the biggest gaps there is Italy. Again, 0 is the worst performance. So Italy's got a very different set of conditions for women than for men. In fact, it's driven by that. Okay, not so much more. We've got country profiles in the book for each OECD country. This is an example for the USA. And you've got the relative performance across the composite element scores. So the US is at the OECD upper rate, you know, on networks and on leadership. It's the top. And then on certain other things like institutions and infrastructure or finance, it's actually not at the top, not at the X, not at the red cross. Nearly there. So then we've got 3 examples of entrepreneurial ecosystem policies nationally that we think policymakers could get inspiration from. Tech Leap in the Netherlands, French Tech in France, and also the Startup Act in Italy. They're packages of measures. They work hand in hand with the regional authorities. And then in conclusion, the report's available, free to download. The accompanying paper's free to download. Aim is to help policymakers identify where to prioritize policy. It's complementary to other tools that we'll hear about. It's a first edition and we'll improve on it. And in the improvements we're thinking about, maybe we need to present this for clubs of countries maybe we need to have more countries, maybe we need to go down to the regional level, and couldn't we get some better indicators? Well, that depends. We got the best we could at the time. There we are. And on top of that, last thing is we don't think that's it at all. We think that this diagnostic tool is an entry point for a policymaker to start their own dialogues. So you can sit down then with the ecosystem stakeholders and you can say, we've got this score. Do you think it's right? What do you think's behind it? Is there anything can be done about it? So it's a tool to start dialogue. And then it's also an opportunity to do deep dives. OECD does deep dives at the regional level and on particular policy themes. So thank you for listening. We've got a panel, so we'll move on to Chris. Do you want to click for your...
Thank you very much. Mic 3.
We are hoping that there'd be about 10 minutes or so. It depends how quickly we can get through it. How are we doing so far? Yeah, we want to have some discussion. We might not finish at 45 exactly.
So great. Thank you very much, John. I'd also love to ask some questions about your index, but I've only got 5 minutes. So actually, I'm going to use that time to pitch a couple of our own approaches to ecosystem measurement. Let me go back one. To pitch a couple of our own approaches and maybe then just talk a little bit about the pros and cons. So, as I said at the beginning, my name's Chris Haley. I'm head of research at Startup Genome. And we are really firm believers in the value and the importance of ecosystem measurement. It's the heart of what we do, and we are constantly striving to get better at it, and also to find ways of presenting that measurement back to people, particularly policymakers. And one of the important ways we do that is through composite indices. So this, as you see here, is one of our flagship productions. In many ways, this is very similar to the approach that John mentioned the OECD has now adopted. We've been running this for over a decade now. Again, it is a composite index. What you can see on the right-hand side there is, again, the sort of sub-factors of the index. Quite similar to the OECD approach, we've got about 40-something metrics in total, which we then combine to produce the composites you see on the right-hand side. Unlike the OECD, we actually then go a step further and do aggregate it up to the national level, where essentially the exam question is, if you are an entrepreneur looking to start and scale, which ecosystem would maximize your chances of doing that? So this index is very much an ecosystem level index, which we define as an area of a 100-kilometer radius because we need a comparable unit across different areas. It is focused very much on high-tech, high-growth entrepreneurship. We're looking primarily at VC-backed companies. And all of the metrics we have here are tested very rigorously against a basket of outputs where we're primarily looking at things like what increases success rates in an ecosystem, overall VC funding, percentages of startups progressing from sort of C to Series A, numbers of unicorns, and so on. So that's one of the indices. The methodology is all available online if you would like to download it. The other that I wanted to talk about briefly is a new and rather more experimental one. We launched this last year as a pilot with the G20. This is something we're calling the APEXE Index. Now, this is not a classical composite index. What we're actually trying to do here is measure the degree to which ecosystems are making the most of their innovative potential. So what we actually do is we have two composites, one which is a measure of what we're calling kind of innovative potential, so that's based on things like total patent production, total other measures of IP, trademarks, and so on, as well as academic publications, STEM students, and so on. And then we have a different composite which measures ecosystem performance, entrepreneurial activity, and we're very much looking at the difference between those two measures. So a little bit experimental. Now, how and why are we, well, how do people use this and why are we doing this? So we're producing this really for the benefit of policymakers because we see a few different ways in which policymakers can use this. primarily, these are tools to diagnose an ecosystem and prioritize ecosystem gaps. So with the GSER, as I mentioned, we've got a number of different metrics, and it provides a really macro high-level view of, if I'm a policymaker looking at my ecosystem, should I concentrate more on late-stage capital or should I concentrate on talent, for instance? And it gives that very, very high-level tool to help prioritize. It also, I think, helps in terms of designing interventions because we can show ecosystem leaders which are equivalent ecosystems. There's no point in simply looking at Silicon Valley if you are nowhere near Silicon Valley. What we can do is say these look like more comparable peers from whom you might want to learn. And also, quite importantly, it's a tool for getting the buy-in of others. So what we find is even if you're talking at ministerial level, those ministers may need to get buy-in from other ministers, from Treasury and so on. And in that regard, having a simple composite is quite a simple but powerful tool that people can say, look, we are the third ecosystem in our region and we think we should probably be number one. Just before I hand over, I know we're running out of time, a couple of caveats. So composites can be very powerful, but clearly they do reduce a multi-dimensional system down to a single or maybe a sort of 4 or 5 or 10 dimensions. And that can be powerful, but it does obscure a certain amount of information as well. And I think we've got to be very transparent about how we make these indices so that we are not misleading people. The second thing is that there is clearly a danger that we concentrate on what we can measure, right? And there's lots of ecosystem factors that are hugely important, things like mindset, things like ecosystem connectivity, where frankly we do need better measures, and we need measures that are geographically and culturally independent. I'd love to go on, but I think I'm out of time, so I'll stop there.
Listen, if you three are okay with it, we could have Dan, because you said you needed to rush off, and so we could have two points. You could take this mic, Dan. We could have one more person, and then we'll carry on.
This is unexpected. When I brought to light the metaphor of entrepreneurship ecosystems 15 years ago, I had a very different idea of what an ecosystem is that's represented here or in any of the conversations so far. And I blame myself for it, and I'm going to try to correct it now if I can. You cannot have, think about a swamp, okay? Because, and I recommend all you researchers, as a sanity check, just think about a swamp. I live near a swamp. Think about a swamp. And that's an ecosystem. Why? Because the various parts are feeding into each other and have created self-regulating with a certain amount of stability, okay? There's something equilibrium about it. You cannot have an ecosystem for the mosquito, for God's sakes. The mosquito is an element in the ecosystem. The bear is an element. You cannot do what you're doing without addressing the question of how this is supporting the needs and objectives of the actors in the ecosystem. You've taken one actor, the policymaker. This would look completely different if you were addressing the needs of the bankers and the needs of the media and the needs of the universities. It would look completely different. This is an anti-ecosystem approach to ecosystems. It's extracting the mosquito, the policymaker, out and saying, we're going to address, I'm not joking. I didn't get a chance to complain enough yesterday, so I'm doing it today. So you're abstracting. This is an anti-ecosystem approach to ecosystems. And so if you really want to do this, as an and why is that important? Because it really is the ecosystem that supports something related to entrepreneurship. So I'll say just one word about that, what that something is. You said it, thank you for qualifying your comment, Chris. I really think that's valuable and appreciative. Chris has extracted, now in terms of outcome, has extracted in Startup Genome, at least, and that you're honest about it, fine, and clear about it, as opposed to yesterday it wasn't quite so clear. And you're looking only at high-growth venture-backed companies. Oh, who is that valuable for? Well, you have to think about that. That is a smidgen a smidgen of the growth entrepreneurship in the world. We know that, I've been a venture capitalist, we know that venture capitalists choose 1 out of 100 or 200, however you measure. And so it's a very rarefied group of entrepreneurs that get any kind of equity capital. So that's all I'll say, John. I wanted to make it interesting. I'm a mosquito, no.
No, that's great. Now, Dan, one of the founders. Yeah, I'll just say, I reckon then what we've got is a policymaker ecosystem tool. Maybe that should be in the title. It's just one of the players in the ecosystem. This one's designed for the policymaker. So that's right, Dan. The OECD one is not just about the VC-backed, but Chris is going to explain about the APEXE.
No, I just actually want to respond to Dan. I mean, I thank you for the provocation, Dan. I think some of that is a little bit unfair. First of all, this is a tool primarily for policymakers, but what it does is takes an ecosystem, compares it to others, and says, for instance, look, we think there are various measures of talent, say, where you are not, as an ecosystem, on a par with peer ecosystems. What we don't then say is precisely how you might want to address that, but the interventions that might address that are precisely the ones that then you might address through, for instance, visas. You might address through more enterprise education. You might actually work with the universities to tackle. Similarly, if the tool suggests that actually your early stage funding is not appropriate, then you would look at interventions with the banks, with the angel networks, with VCs and so on. So this is giving you really a very high level view of how many of the outputs compare to different ecosystems. But I mean, I think we could have a much longer conversation, and I'd love to pick some of this up with you afterwards.
Yeah, we wanted to bring Dan in whilst he had the chance, and thanks for that, Dan. And we'll go on to Pulami now.
Thank you. I'll be quick. All right. So I'll just do a slide or two. So, and we were remarking with Eric earlier that this, in other GECs, this term wasn't so prominent, and now it's everywhere. Also in practitioner-based gatherings like AfriLabs and other organizations, it's everywhere. But from a research point of view, it's quite scarce. And you could see the orange there, it's for African entrepreneurial ecosystems. So actually, Africa almost is excluded entirely, at least our empirical evidence of this from the field, if you look in the last 15 years. So we thought this was quite interesting. One of the reasons why we haven't been able to measure ecosystems in Africa is lack of data sets, particularly longitudinal data sets, even just good, credible cross-sectional data. So we kind of took Eric's framework and Daniel Lassenberg's and did an inclusion and exclusion criteria based on a number of things. For example, in Africa, the term leadership, for us, we don't have one visible ecosystem leader or clear indicators for that. It's almost like serendipitous. It's a lot of orchestration that you cannot really pin, which is one thing I agree with Daniel Lassenberg on. So we excluded that, and there's other things that we excluded for that reason. So we ended up with this 7-factor framework in permission with Eric, based on our context. I'll skip all of this. It's good to say that we use a 7-factor framework, but we've got 20 indicators, and this shows you the distributions in Africa. And you could see things like road, finance-related measures are quite skewed compared to other indicators like the rule of law, for example. VC, you could see at the bottom right, fairly skewed, largely concentrated in 4 countries, South Africa, Nigeria, Kenya, and Egypt. Anyways, let me do this slide and the last one. So what we did is we launched what we call the African Entrepreneurial Ecosystem Index, and our efforts started with 29 countries. So you could download this as a working paper out there right now. And we show that actually it weighs very well with the 3 prominent measures of productive ecosystems already, like new corporations, innovative startups, and high-growth firms. And also, it outperforms GDP per capita. So we think that's a good start. We use a I think for us, dissemination is key. So people are not into stats or modeling. So red is bad, green is good, yellow is okay. So we kind of simplify that way for policymakers. And this is just a snippet of one country. I'll skip the other country context. And this is quite simple. So on a Monday morning right now in Kenya, probably they should focus on the reds. If they have a 5 to 10 year sort of approach or long-term approach, they can start looking at the yellows. I'll skip all of these and go to the last slide. I agree with what my colleagues have said. It's not about measuring that this country is number 1 or number 2. That is completely outdated, and we already know that. But we think this image is quite powerful because in our view, which we call it a heat map for now, but intellectually it actually shows you pathologies in Africa. In fact, you look at the best country there, Mauritius, we index this, of course, this is a composite score out of 7, so we normalize it to 1, so which means 7 is good and something lower is bad. But you could see in Africa, actually, that the highest is almost barely above average. So essentially, all ecosystems, at least in the 29 countries, are struggling and need a lot of work. If you take a Pan-African approach, you could see pathologies. So one research question we will ask in another paper is, what would it take for Africa to explore a Pan-African approach? Because if you're telling me that a country with so many reds is going to fix and get out of their own ecosystem troubles in the next 5 years, it's not going to happen. So what does it look like to explore transnational approaches from a policy point of view? Which is a big question given the states of African countries, how they're fighting with each other and all of those things. So there's a lot of other interesting questions that are emerging just out of this. But this is not a good picture. And we could only be able to say that after this effort. Thank you.
Okay. So, hi everyone. The good thing is we've gone from global to regional, and I'm going to speak from a country level. For us at Fate Foundation, I think the important thing for us was almost like when you look at World Bank HDI data. So you see literacy levels, you see human capital indicator levels. You can see a country snapshot, but that country, the indicator that you have for a country can be so disparate when you then go at state and national levels. So what we've done is almost then the next level, where we then look at that data and information at state level. So Nigeria has 36 states. We're quite a large country, as quite a lot of us will know. And we have 36 states and then the Federal Capital Territory. I'm waiting for my slides to come up. But for us, more importantly, was to first of all, no, not this one. It's a blue Fate Foundation will be there. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. But I'll go on. No, it's yeah. So I guess Tom is looking for it. So 2 things for us was that we needed to be able to create. We needed to be able to make sure that whatever we were given as an ecosystem snapshot was relevant not just from a country perspective, but a subnational perspective, but also in a way that policymakers are then able to understand the impacts at national level and at subnational level of key policies that are made when you're looking at like monetary policies and fiscal policies. And so hopefully that comes up soon. You'll see that. We also do a mapping for the 90% plus of entrepreneurial activity in Nigeria. So we look at micro, small, and medium businesses, so what you call like small and growing businesses across board. We work very strongly with what's like the SBA equivalent in Nigeria, the Small and Medium Enterprise Development Agency, the National Association of SMEs, and then we have a top line level of 5 indicator areas, but then the sub-indicators, broadly speaking, about 20 indicators when you then break them down. I'm sure you'll get it soon, but I really hope you can see it. So that's number 2. Number three that we found out was that it was then very helpful, particularly when you're then engaging with governors and even other people who are like actors in the state, to understand how key policy changes that have been effected in the last 1 to 2 years, thank you, finally, had the effect. Sorry, can I have that? How do I move it? Which one do you need? Okay. Thank you. Yes. So this is how we've broken down the enterprise type that we assess. And then those 5 areas are the top line indicator areas that we then use as a composite level. And this is an example of the most recent one we had in 2024. We've done this now for the last 4 years, and we will have another one coming out again at the end of 2025. And this here then gives you sort of like a snapshot of how we've then disaggregated it across the top line indicator areas that we looked at on a year-on-year basis. And then this then also gives you the state level data so that you can then look at it. And the reason why, again, this is important, and I'll use an example of like literacy rates. If you're looking at World Bank data, literacy rate levels, for instance, for Lagos State may be 66%. Then for a state like Zamfara, maybe 29%. But then you then look at the national literacy rates, and it gives you maybe 40, 50%. So you can look at that from a national level, but if you're going in program-wise or policy-wise, and you don't have a good view of what that then means subnationally, you may go in with an approach that will go off at all the wrong points. So that's one point. The second point I'm going to round up with is that what was also important for us was to disaggregate that data. So we have gender disaggregated data, age level disaggregated data, location disaggregated data. So we worked recently with the Kingdom of Netherlands. We're doing an incubation program over the last 5 years. And we then decided to do a youth mapping study, youth entrepreneurship ecosystem mapping study. Now, this is not for policymakers. This is actually for ESOs and program managers and implementers who are designing programs, designing funding for young people. And again, we couldn't do this with 36 states. So we just picked 6 states. And we picked about 4 to 5 key sectors that we saw high level of youth entrepreneurship and innovation in. And again, then disaggregated that to give the different indicator points that we wanted to measure. And for us, that's the lesson point, that however way we're measuring ecosystem performance has to be very useful and insightful for those who are making policy to see what the implications are around policy making and implementation, but also understanding what the sort of like gender, age view, sector view, and even location view dynamics that are there too. All our research is available on our website, and the details and the methodology approach we use, you can also find that there. Thank you.
So the last speaker, and then you get your questions and comments.
Yeah, can you hear me? Yes. Well, it's great to be here with you, all of you, and also with the OECD. So the OECD has really accelerated the science of entrepreneurial ecosystem analytics with a rigorous approach, high scientific standards, and also high policy engagement. So in contrast to what some of you might think that John and I have been doing this, there's a dream team at the OECD behind this, and more than 100 scholars, policymakers, policy wonks, analysts that we have consulted over the last 2 years. So this is really a collective learning exercise in itself, and I think we also need to appreciate that this public good has been produced for all the 38 member states of the OECD and even beyond that. And why is it a public good? Well, it's a diagnostic tool that everybody can use. And it's a diagnostic tool that goes beyond fads and fashion. So you might have seen these debates between policymakers in the European Union saying, well, we push 2 billion venture capital. Now we do 6 billion venture capital. And that's, of course, ridiculous because it's not about how much you put into a system or how quick you are to follow recent policy fashions. But this is a tool to get to know the system better. In that sense, I disagree a little with Dan. So we are really into understanding the system. And the system sometimes is a bit like a fishbowl to a fish. So if you ask the average entrepreneur what is not working in this ecosystem, well, you say, well, a lack of access to finance, or I really have problems with getting talent. But he won't say, well, there's too much corruption, or the entrepreneurial culture has not developed well. And that is things that we are able to trace and also are relevant to people that are responsible for the system. So this is really a systems tool. And I hope that if you feel sick, you don't go for the first medicine that you find in the kitchen sink, but you go to the doctor. So this is also for policymakers, not to copy the first fashion that is in the neighboring country, but really to look at the data and to get a good diagnostics, not because that is the final answer, but that gives you a way to have better informed decision making, better informed dialogues with relevant stakeholders. So this allows you not to just make policies blind-eyed or blind-sighted, but really use the data that's around. It's not rocket science. We don't have the perfect data, so it's also an invitation to all of you to make this better. But I think the OECD has done a terrific job to get the first version of this freely available online. And I did a little illegal pre-launch in Chile last week, so John should not know about this. So we already checked it a bit. So how does this work? And it's also emancipating. So for example, Chile, are there people from Chile in the room? No? Yes, there is. So Chile, we showed that Chile is better than Spain on formal institutions and entrepreneurial culture. So that is really emancipating for Chile to realize that it's doing such a good job. But it also has a signaling function. So for example, it does way worse on market access and market development, even worse than Mexico and Colombia. So this is something to push for and to improve for Chile. So that is one example of how to start the conversation, so to say. And of course, we also like to use this tool not only for learning within Chile, but also between other countries, and really have this as a collective learning tool between different economies to get inspired by each other to learn. And also, once they have prioritized a particular policy, to learn afterwards whether the policy achieves the envisioned outcomes, which very often is not the case, but you only know that if there's good monitoring and evaluation. So this is really a tool, diagnostic, to find out what we should do, to have a better conversation on what can be done, implement this, and then learn how this implementation goes. So really a tool for collective learning to get to know your own economy and to make it a better place for entrepreneurship in its own way.
So if the organizers here will let us, we could have 2 questions and then we'll stop. Or comments, yeah? So who wants to go down there? It's not up to me to do this, is it?
Thank you very much, Chad Renanda from GEN Australia. Quick, testing 1, 2. Amazing effort, amazing work. It's really good to see the thought that's gone into it. Thank you very much. One question I have with regards to indexes, and I appreciate what you're saying, it's not necessarily something to compare, but I will say that countries do take a hold of it, policymakers then do the media releases, hey, we're better than this one, or criticism, we've fallen so far, so that they will be used a bit like that. The other question and concern I have with most indexing, particularly around innovation entrepreneurship, is that it doesn't necessarily show some of the equality factors. And I do appreciate that the report that just came out does have some aspect of that. But this, or in particular the GSCR, will rank something high or low, but not have the potentially inequality. And by not citing that, we're actually rewarding potentially bad outcomes in a community from the result of innovation entrepreneurship that might create inequality. So is there thoughts on having something, and I know Jeannie's not, maybe it's not necessarily appropriate, but something around an equality factor to correspond with the ranking, just to see what the potential outcomes or impacts are, so we can compare like for like?
One last person, yeah. Norris wins. One last person. Over to Norris.
Normally, hello? Normally I'm loud enough to not need the mic. I'll give you kind of a softball. What can we do, and whether we're an OECD country or not, how can we do to help you move this forward? What kinds of feedback are you looking for? What kind of evangelizing would you like us to do?
Yeah, I think that we want to get the tool used, so that's the most important thing. Get it disseminated, known about, try and start dialogues with policy have workshops, with policymakers to talk about those results. The OECD will join in and we'll speak about it in your workshops. And do some deep dives into. Now, other things you can help with is feedback on, having read this, what you think the next step would be. But remember, it's got to be feasible. So that would be where the inequality stuff could come in. Have a look at the indicators. We've got about 4. But clearly you could do more. Give us suggestions. You can email to me and Eric. And on Chad's point about the index, I don't know. I mean, what we just wanted to avoid was that there would be a ranking where you'd say the best entrepreneurial ecosystem in the world is country X. Because we thought that every country can learn from everyone else. It's a leveling up. And I think that more important is where you're strong and weak inside your own country. The comparison with other countries is to help you understand how good you might be able to get. Anyway, Eric, did anybody else? We're just stopping now, basically.
Yeah, perhaps one final thing to answer to Chad. So we took also the missing entrepreneurs as one of the dependent variables, which clearly shows how much access there is for particular groups in society. So that is one way to take into account inequality of access to resource. It's not perfect, but that's one of the dimensions that we're also looking to dive more deeply into.
We could do a regional version, where you had, so you show certain regions have got the weaker ecosystems and what's the problem inside of that region, but it's just going to multiply the demands on us in generating it massively when we go to regional level. And you could say, there's a women entrepreneurship ecosystem or a deep tech entrepreneur. So we could make little sub-indexes for different ecosystems. But I don't want to get in trouble with the organisers, so I think we'd better end now. Thanks so much. Have a look at the report.